There are stories that live in the shadows between history and silence, tales whispered through torn pages and dust-sealed vaults, where the ink bleeds truth only to hide it again. Imagine corridors lined with cold marble and locked cabinets humming with forgotten names. Imagine the hum of a projector in a dark archive room, showing frames that were never meant to be seen, somewhere beneath the calm surface of old wars and distant prayers. Something else moved. An order of men who believed that salvation could be forged from the ashes of destruction. Not heroes, not villains, but keepers of a secret so corrosive it could undo the story we tell ourselves about what was righteous and what was necessary. You may think history ended when the war did, but beneath the weight of the years, its pulse still beats. Slow, deliberate, and waiting to be heard again. Chapter 1. The Vanished Convoy of Operation Iron Wave. In late April 1945, as Berlin burned and the Reich fractured into ash and ruin, a convoy of 5 Allied transport ships departed from the port of Kiel under the cover of night. Its codename was Operation Iron Wave. Officially, the vessels were carrying confiscated German industrial machinery for debriefing and evaluation by the Combined Intelligence Objectives Subcommittee, but fragments of later declassified correspondence between US Naval Intelligence and the Manhattan Engineer District reveal another objective: the transport of specialized German scientific personnel and classified material recovered from captured research facilities in northern Germany, bound for a secure facility in Newfoundland. The convoy's lead ship, the USS Callister, signaled a routine transmission at 0200 hours on May 3, 1945, just south of Greenland. 20 minutes later, all radio traffic ceased. Radar screens at Naval Air Station Argentia recorded brief echoes before all 5 blips vanished simultaneously. There were no distress calls. The Atlantic absorbed them whole. For decades, Iron Wave remained a whispered legend among post-war intelligence circles. Officially, it was classified as lost due to severe weather conditions. Yet, in a 1952 memorandum unearthed by a Freedom of Information Act request, Admiral Jonas Holbrook of the Atlantic Command wrote to General Leslie Groves under the heading, Eyes Only, Manhattan Continuation Directive. The memo referenced recovery priority of experimental containment units and instructed that public disclosure of convoy disappearance will be attributed to non-combat loss. The term containment units appears nowhere else in naval documentation from the period. Holbrook's personal files were destroyed in a suspicious 1954 archive fire in Washington, D.C. in 1957, a Soviet reconnaissance satellite, part of the early Cosmos series, captured high-resolution images of a metallic anomaly embedded beneath the ice shelf near Baffin Bay. The coordinates, 74° N, 80° W, aligned closely with the last known position of Iron Wave's convoy. Within 3 months, a joint CIA MI6 expedition was deployed under the guise of a geological survey named Operation Shale Mirror. The mission was abruptly terminated after 12 days. No official report was released. British Foreign Office logs marked the team's withdrawal as a logistical failure. Yet, an internal MI6 cable dated September 1957 mentions successful isolation of subject site, recovery deemed hazardous due to instability of core. No subsequent operation was launched. Survivor accounts from other Atlantic convoys mention unusual communications blackout orders following the disappearance. Lieutenant Charles D. Merriman of the USS Tabor stated in a private 1968 interview that his ship was instructed to maintain total silence regarding convoy movement toward Greenland and to ignore any floating wreckage without identification markings. The instruction was signed by Rear Admiral Thomas Ingalls, an officer not listed on any operational roster from that period. Merriman claimed to have seen a file folder marked Iron Wave, Sub-Level 3 clearance, while stationed at the Argentia Command Center. Within months of his statement, he died in an apparent car accident on Route 9, near Dover, Delaware. His military records were later found to contain a redacted notation. Security anomaly. Restricted communication. In the mid-1960s, a Canadian icebreaker, the CCGS Resolute, encountered unregistered metallic debris near the same coordinates recorded by the Soviets. The debris was described in the ship's log as smooth, burnished alloy, exhibiting magnetically neutral properties. The object was retrieved and transferred to US custody under NORAD liaison escort. No follow-up entry exists. A decade later, a classified US Navy technical report Triton Memorandum 78B referred to unidentified ferrous composites consistent with pre-war German alloying patterns, possessing unknown fatigue resistance. The authorship was attributed to the Naval Research Laboratory's Materials Division, but the report vanished during the 1973 National Archives consolidation. What was Operation Ironwave transporting? Testimonies from debriefed German scientists under Operation Paperclip provide scattered hints. Dr. Erich Sauter, a metallurgist formerly attached to the Peenemünde Army Research Center, spoke during a 1947 interrogation of a polar transport mission intended to deliver containment units to a safe, neutral port to ensure the continuation of Uran project. Studies, when pressed, Sauter described the units as self-sealing, pressure chambers designed to maintain interior isolation from environmental contact. He was transferred to Los Alamos later that year and died under unexplained circumstances in 1949. Declassified communications between the War Department and the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency contain references to a Newfoundland containment incident. The file, unavailable in full, mentions possible compromise of experimental cargo lost en route from German theatre and recommends permanent environmental containment of site under Arctic Protocol. This would be consistent with the early Cold War secrecy surrounding both nuclear and biological research. The language suggests that Iron Wave's cargo may have included materials not intended for public awareness, perhaps experimental nuclear isotopes or biological cultures captured from SS research units under the Ahnenerbe banner. Yet, no direct documentation survives. By the late 1970s, the Iron Wave case had faded into the realm of conspiracy. Independent researchers linked it to Project Mogul, to early CIA biowarfare programs, even to Soviet interference. But one document, obtained in 1998 from a partially declassified MI6 archive, reignited speculation. The Holbrook packet, as it came to be called, included a single-page summary of operational asset losses listing Convoy Iron Wave, 5 vessels, cargo class 3A, containment, status compromised. Recommend polar quarantine pending directive revision. Below, a single handwritten line read, Containment breach at sea, possible atmospheric contamination minimal. The document was stamped in fading ink. 1946, eyes only, continuation directive. In 2003, sonar mapping conducted by a private Norwegian survey vessel detected 5 anomalies beneath 180 meters of ice near Baffin Bay. The shapes corresponded to hull profiles of World War II-era Liberty ships. When the discovery was forwarded to the US Navy for verification, the survey's public record was retracted, and the Norwegian Maritime Directorate issued an immediate embargo on coordinates, citing national security considerations. The captain of the survey vessel later described receiving a polite visit from 2 men identifying themselves as American Arctic Research Division. They confiscated all sonar data and left him with a non-disclosure agreement. Under threat of license revocation, there are no graves for the 227 men who served aboard Iron Wave's convoy. Their names appear on no memorials, their service unacknowledged. A declassified 1988 Navy memo, unearthed by historian Paul Forstner, states bluntly, Iron Wave does not exist. All personnel reclassified as maritime operational loss under NATO File Suppression Order 242-5C. The document is stamped with a postscript. Do not reopen. Today, a few surviving photographs from Operation Shale Mirror remain stored in the British National Archives, marked Photographic Anomalies, non-public. Each shows a featureless expanse of ice, but in the final frame, a faint dark line curves across the horizon. Analysts suggest it may be a shadow or crevasse. Others insist it resembles the silhouette of a ship's bow frozen beneath decades of silence. Some say that beneath Baffin Bay's ice lies the frozen memory of a war that refused to end. A convoy that carried secrets meant to die with the Reich, but instead became the foundation of a new kind of silence, one forged not in battlefields or treaties, but in classified corridors where the truth is weighed against the cost of revelation. Iron Wave remains missing, its name erased, its coordinates sealed. Yet for those who still sift through the redacted files and erase names, a single unanswered question continues to echo through the archives of history. What was so dangerous that 5 ships and every man aboard were made to vanish rather than be found? Chapter 2. Shadows Beneath the Baltic. Project Rauk. In February 1949, a Swedish naval reconnaissance patrol near the island of Gotland detected an anomalous sonar reflection. The Baltic was calm that winter, the surface sealed in grey ice, but beneath it, the instruments recorded a structure, a geometric mass at 60 meters depth. Divers from the Swedish Coastal Artillery Regiment, under Commander Arvid Lindholm, descended through the freezing water on February 18th. What they found was not a shipwreck. It was a bunker, a reinforced concrete shell half buried in the silt, with a collapsed entrance and 2 intact pressure doors, bearing the insignia of the Reichsforschungsrat, the Reich Research Council. The find was quickly classified under the internal designation Project Rauk, named for the stone formations along Gotland's coast that locals claimed hid spirits of the dead. The initial survey reported electrical wiring still active, powered by a decaying battery array. Inside, the divers discovered corroded equipment, large cylindrical housings with brass couplings, fragments of magnetic rings, and fragments of German documentation referencing Magnetohydrodynamische Antriebseinheit, or Magnetohydrodynamic Propulsion Unit. The technology, unheard of in 1945, described propulsion by electromagnetic acceleration of conductive fluid, essentially silent underwater motion without propellers. When news reached Stockholm, the discovery was sealed under the Official Secrets Act. Only 3 officers from the Swedish General Staff were briefed. A report was quietly shared with British naval intelligence in May of that year, sparking urgent interest from the Admiralty's Department of Scientific Research. Archival fragments later revealed that the site was originally established in 1944 as Versuchsstelle Ostsee 12 a Baltic testing facility under the authority of the Kriegsmarine's Erprobungsstelle Travemünde. The installation's purpose was to test advanced submarine propulsion units intended for a series of experimental U-boats, designs so ambitious that even the type Vatican seemed conventional by comparison. The files referenced a plasma antrieb, a propulsion system powered by high-voltage plasma arcs within sealed conduits of mercury. The Soviets, advancing through East Prussia at the time, were unaware of the base's existence. Gotland, neutral Swedish territory, was considered beyond suspicion. Yet the final log entry from the Reichsforschungsrat's Baltic Division, dated April 1945, states, "Primary cores transferred via Baltic courier. Remaining assets sealed per order Raukhafen." No record of a Raukhafen has ever been found. When the British arrived in late 1949 under a joint inspection agreement, the bunker was already flooded. Only the upper chambers were accessible. Inside, Royal Navy engineer Lieutenant Geoffrey Haynes documented 2 objects resembling turbine rings constructed of an unknown metal composite. His report, later recovered from declassified MI6 archives, describes the rings as non-ferrous, density exceeding titanium, no corrosion evident. Samples were sent to the Admiralty Materials Laboratory in Teddington. Within 2 months, the laboratory burned to the ground. Official cause, electrical fault. Haynes was reassigned and died in a diving accident off Malta the following year. Swedish authorities denied all knowledge of the operation. The location was reclassified as a maritime hazard and quietly removed from navigation charts. Yet Soviet naval intelligence took notice. In 1952, a KGB memorandum identified a German underwater structure near Gotland as a potential cache of advanced propulsion research. A secret mission by the Soviet Baltic Fleet, designated Operation Sever 14Rs, attempted to retrieve the equipment. Only 2 of the 5 divers returned. Their statements, later translated from Russian archives, describe lights still active beneath the ice, moving without sound. Both men were confined to a military hospital in Kronstadt and later transferred to undisclosed facilities. Their names do not appear in any subsequent personnel rosters. Throughout the 1950s, Swedish fishermen reported electrical interference in the same waters, compasses spinning, radios crackling, strange hums from below. The government dismissed it as magnetic anomalies caused by wartime debris. In 1961, the Swedish Navy conducted a classified sonar mapping exercise, discovering that the original bunker extended into a subterranean tunnel network beneath the seabed. The corridors led to a secondary structure located 1 kilometer offshore. The data was suppressed, and the area designated a restricted military zone. All public records concerning Project Rauk were sealed under the designation Kala Archivet. The Cold Archive, declassified NATO documents from 1982, however, confirm renewed activity in the area. During a routine submarine patrol, the Swedish submarine HMS Sjöman detected an unidentified object moving at 30 knots directly beneath it, without any propeller signature. The incident was logged as Submarine Contact 82 Baltic. NATO analysts suspected a Soviet craft, but Soviet archives later revealed no such deployment at the time. The Baltic, they claimed, was quiet. The sonar printout, released decades later, shows an object nearly cylindrical, 40 meters in length, trailing a faint magnetic wake. The Navy called it the Ghost Contact. One Swedish defense analyst, Erik Hallström, devoted his career to uncovering the truth behind Project Rauk. In his unpublished notes, seized after his death in 1994, Hallström wrote, "Rauk is not about propulsion. It's about containment. The base was not a factory, it was a vault." Among his papers was a photograph dated 1950, showing two naval officers standing beside a metallic sphere roughly 2 meters across. The sphere's surface was smooth, almost mirror-like, with an emblem faintly visible, an eagle without swastika, perched above the letters AEG. No other documentation of the sphere exists. Later, FOIA releases from the CIA reference a 1958 cable exchange between Langley and the US Embassy in Stockholm titled Hydroelectromagnetic Device Inquiry. The message was classified, top secret, Umbra. It advised the immediate suspension of joint recovery efforts due to contamination, hazard. The term contamination was ambiguous, but subsequent correspondence referred to high electromagnetic discharge risk to personnel. Following that, Project Rauk vanished completely from Swedish and British records. In 1991, after the fall of the Soviet Union, portions of the KGB's Baltic naval archives were made public. Among them was a single page referencing Project Rauk. It described a 1944 German experiment involving fluidic magnetic containment for vessel propulsion and energy storage. The experiment reportedly failed, causing collapse of generator field and fatalities. Soviet engineers visiting the site in 1946 recorded residual magnetism equivalent to 80,000 Gauss long after all power. Sources were presumed destroyed. The entry concluded, "Hazard remains active. Recommend burial." Today, the coordinates of the Rauk site remain off-limits under Swedish military protection. Satellite imagery reveals a restricted perimeter stretching 2 nautical miles around the zone. Occasional reports from independent divers describe unnatural pressure fluctuations and radio interference, but none have returned with physical evidence. In 2015, an anonymous leak from the Swedish Defence Research Agency suggested that the government continues to monitor persistent low-frequency resonance emanating from the seabed. The frequency, 11.3 Hz, matches no known geological or mechanical source. It pulses every 17 minutes, like a heartbeat. Whether Project Rauk was an experimental Nazi propulsion system, a failed energy weapon, or something more obscure, its traces remain sealed beneath the grey waters of the Baltic. The archives tell only fragments, burned reports, erased names, missing samples. Yet, every few years, fishermen still report strange disturbances in the same coordinates, where compasses spin and sonar whispers back in a voice that seems to hum from the steel bones of a dead war. Beneath the cold silence of the Baltic, the machinery of Project Rauk may still be breathing, quietly turning in the dark, long after those who built it were buried, and long after the world chose to forget that it ever existed. Chapter 3. The Warsaw Directive. Operation Echo Glass. In the chaotic months following the liberation of Warsaw in 1945, the city was a shell, streets reduced to rubble, its surviving infrastructure commandeered by the Soviet NKVD. Yet amid the ruins, rumours spread among resistance veterans of a buried German communications chamber hidden beneath the former Ministry of Transport. The Red Army dismissed it as myth, but British intelligence had reason to believe otherwise. Documents recovered from a captured Abwehr safehouse in Krakow referred to Echo Glass, a directive ordering the secure storage of an encryption core and mirror matrices deep within the capital before the Wehrmacht's retreat. The term mirror matrices appeared nowhere else in German codework. In February 1946, a small Anglo-Polish unit, operating unofficially under SIS supervision, was dispatched to locate the cache before the Soviets could claim it. Their mission would vanish into one of the Cold War's earliest silences. The operation, led by Major Henry K. Ellison of the British Special Liaison Section, consisted of 6 men drawn from Polish Home Army veterans and 2 cryptologic experts from Bletchley Park. Their orders, signed by Colonel John Tiltman, authorized limited extraction of classified material of pre-Soviet priority. The cover story, Post-War Reconstruction Survey. They entered Warsaw on February 13, 1946, through the ruins of the Praga district. According to fragments of Ellison's field diary, recovered decades later from MI6 archives, the team used surviving German architectural blueprints, noting a sealed substructure beneath the transport ministry connecting to a wartime communications tunnel network. The blueprints bore the stamp Heereswaffenamt Nachrichtenzentrale, 1944. The final line read simply, Chamber 4, Mirror Facility. The descent took place at night, February 15th. Under the smouldering ruins, the team discovered a reinforced steel hatch welded shut. Using thermite charges, they cut through to reveal a narrow staircase descending into a chamber of concrete and steel. Inside were 3 rows of consoles, burned, stripped of wires, but unmistakably German in design. On one wall, an array of glass panels was mounted, each covered in fine metallic filaments. The panels reflected light oddly, almost like smoked mirrors. According to Ellison's notes, the equipment emitted a faint ozone smell, as if something had once run hot for hours and suddenly stopped. Beneath one panel, they found a file box labeled Project Echo Glass, Verschlüsselungsabteilung 4B. Inside, circuit diagrams, relay schematics, and one small metal cartridge engraved with an eagle and lightning bolts, the insignia of Nachrichtenabteilung 3. Within hours, Soviet patrols closed in. The team destroyed their entry point and retreated with the recovered materials through the sewer tunnels. 2 members never re-emerged. Polish witnesses later spoke of gunfire beneath Marszałkowska Street, followed by an explosion that shook the surrounding ruins. Ellison's group reached the Vistula River, where an RAF operative named Captain Peter Wainwright arranged extraction to a C-47 Dakota at Łódź. The recovered files were flown to Tempelhof, then to London. What remained in Warsaw was left to the Soviets, but the Soviets found more than rubble. In 1958, KGB Technical Archives declassified, decades later revealed that the NKVD recovered an experimental cipher array based on light reflection and dual signal patterning. The report described the device as an optical code duplicator capable of generating synchronous output identical to intercepted. Encryption without prior key, knowledge. The concept, mirror encryption, was an early analog attempt at predictive decryption. In essence, it could mimic an opponent's cipher logic by reproducing its own reflection, rendering all code insecure once mirrored. If perfected, such a system could have rendered Allied signals vulnerable in real time. The KGB labelled it a threat to cryptologic parity. The prototype, however, was reportedly incomplete. The Germans had destroyed critical components before retreating. Back in London, Ellison's team submitted their findings to the Secret Intelligence Service under the internal designation Operation Echo Glass. The files were studied at Hanslope Park, home to Britain's code and signals archives. Declassified fragments from 1969 confirm that British engineers reconstructed portions of the captured device, attempting to understand its function. The reconstruction failed repeatedly. Each attempt resulted in spontaneous short circuits. A laboratory note from technician A.D. Sloan reads, "Device output mimics input delay by exactly 3.2 seconds, but reflection amplitude increases exponentially. Possible feedback hazard." The project was terminated in 1948 under the euphemism equipment instability. The components were sealed in lead-lined crates and stored in Vault 9B. Hanslope Park, where they remain to this day. For decades, nothing more was said. Ellison left the service in 1951, reportedly disillusioned, and vanished into quiet retirement in Yorkshire. Yet, in 1964, he was interviewed by a BBC researcher preparing a documentary on post-war intelligence operations. The transcript, released only in 1999, records Ellison saying, "Warsaw was the first digital battlefield. We weren't retrieving technology, we were retrieving the next war." When asked to clarify, he simply replied, "The Soviets didn't need the machine. They needed to understand that we had it." 3 months after the interview, Ellison suffered a fatal heart attack on a London Underground platform. His personal papers were confiscated by government officials within 48 hours. Throughout the 1970s, whispers of echo glass resurfaced among Polish dissidents who claimed the Soviets had reopened the underground chamber beneath the ministry. In 1977, construction workers excavating in central Warsaw unearthed a sealed steel corridor while laying new foundations. The area was immediately cordoned off by the security services. Eyewitnesses described Soviet engineers in radiation suits removing blackened equipment and loading it onto military trucks bound east. The incident was never reported in the press. One of the workers, a man named Marek Zielinski, later fled to France and gave a testimony to a Polish exile newspaper. He claimed to have seen mirrors on the walls that showed us moving before we did. In 1989, as communist control crumbled, a partial NKVD film reel surfaced in Moscow's collapsing archives. It depicted the Warsaw site after recovery, officers standing before the shattered glass panels, measuring devices, and one surviving section labeled Reflex Model B2. A technician's voice on the film says in Russian, "It records before signal entry. The reel ends abruptly." Its authenticity was later verified by Western analysts. Today, the official record of Operation Echo Glass consists of 27 declassified pages out of an estimated 300. The rest remains sealed under the UK's National Security Clause 25. The recovered German schematics show a network of optical relays capable of duplicating code patterns faster than any mechanical device of the era. The technology predicted principles later seen in photonic computing. Whether the Germans understood what they had built is unclear. What is certain is that both sides, the British and the Soviets, chose suppression over understanding. The chamber beneath Warsaw remains sealed, inaccessible beneath modern foundations. The Polish government acknowledges its existence only as a historical military installation of no current interest. Yet, deep within British archives, one last entry dated 1950 bears the signature of Colonel Tiltman. Further study of echo glass suspended. Artificial reflection phenomena pose unacceptable operational risk. Recommend neutralization of surviving Polish chamber. Mirror must not be rebuilt. It ends with a single line typed in capital letters. If you stare into the encryption, it stares back. Chapter 4. The Siberian Vault of Operation Kestrel Line. In the winter of 1952, American aerial reconnaissance flights over eastern Siberia began recording faint, unnatural grid patterns etched into the permafrost. The photos, taken by RB-36D Peacemaker bombers flying under Project Hominy, were meant to map Soviet missile silos. But analysts at the Strategic Air Command noticed something else. Parallel lines extending for nearly 10 kilometers near the Yenisei River, arranged with mathematical precision. When the images were cross-referenced with wartime Wehrmacht supply routes, they aligned perfectly with a corridor used by the German 6th Army's Northern Logistics Division during Operation Silver Fox in 1942. But Germany had never reached that far east. The discovery raised a disturbing possibility, an unacknowledged post-war movement through Soviet territory. Thus began the investigation codenamed Operation Kestrel Line. Declassified CIA field memoranda described the grid as a logistical staging array, believed to be remnants of a train route leading from Novosibirsk toward Irkutsk. Soviet defectors claimed that in late 1945, a convoy of 47 wagons marked with both German and Japanese insignia crossed the Trans-Siberian Line under NKVD escort. The cargo manifests were sealed, labeled Project Morgenrot. Morning read, US intelligence analysts suspected a scientific or biological transfer, part of a covert Soviet effort to absorb German wartime research. However, internal KGB correspondence from 1950, later retrieved by British intelligence, used different language. The train was referred to as the Quarantine Transport. It had departed Kaliningrad with SS medical officers and technical crates, but never arrived in Irkutsk. Somewhere along the route, it disappeared. The Soviets conducted extensive searches throughout the 1950s. Villagers near Bratsk told investigators of a train halted by a blizzard, guarded by soldiers wearing unfamiliar insignia, neither Red Army nor Wehrmacht. They spoke of a stench that lingered for months, and of men in rubber suits who later burned the ground. The area was sealed, marked as restricted, due to contamination hazard. When an American U-2 mission photographed the region in 1957, analysts noted a circular structure half buried in ice. It was later erased from official maps. The CIA listed it under Unidentified Arctic Industrial Object 12. By the mid-1960s, rumors reached the West through defectors that the Soviets had unearthed remnants of the train. One KGB archivist, Oleg Vetrov, later interviewed by German journalists after the fall of the USSR, described sealed metal canisters marked with both the Iron Cross and a chrysanthemum, referring to Imperial Japan's emblem. The canisters were reportedly transported to a remote facility near Yakutsk known internally as Object Zima. Vetrov claimed that when opened, the containers emitted a metallic vapor that corroded instruments and caused nausea among technicians. Within days, the entire recovery team was hospitalized. Moscow classified the event under biologicheski utechka, biological leakage, and ordered the site buried under layers of concrete and permafrost. All documents were sealed in the Lubyanka under the name Kestrel Line. Meanwhile, in Washington, intelligence officers cross-referenced Vetrov's account with debriefings from captured Japanese Unit 731 personnel. One of them, Dr. Masaru Tanaka, mentioned a late-war collaboration with SS medical officers involving freezing containment studies for high-altitude pathogens. The Japanese referred to it as Project Akari. Tanaka claimed the experiments were moved east under German escort when the Reich collapsed, destined for mutual preservation under Soviet supervision. He insisted that the samples were alive. His testimony was dismissed as propaganda until American reconnaissance intercepted coded Soviet transmissions from the Irkutsk region in 1968, referring to Volt K-12, containment failure, mortality confirmed. What lay within Kestrel Line remains speculation, but fragments of declassified US intelligence suggest it may have involved attempts to merge German cryogenic and Japanese biological warfare research. A 1974 Soviet internal memorandum, later leaked through Polish channels, described the accidental discovery of sealed metallic canisters during pipeline excavation. The engineers who reported the find were reassigned within days. A month later, the official route of the East Siberian pipeline was abruptly altered. Internal correspondence cited geological instability, but classified appendices mentioned radiological precautions. Local legend tells of glowing frost that never melted, even in summer. One American report from 1980, NSA Analysis 12-91K, Arctic Containment Anomalies, references intercepted Soviet messages containing the term Kestrel. The memo concludes, evidence suggests continued Soviet monitoring of pre-war German biological payloads. Recommend no Western retrieval attempt. The same year, a CIA operative posing as a Canadian geologist reported sighting a fenced compound marked only by warning signs bearing the double-headed eagle of the Russian state and the word Zona 0. Beyond the fence, half-submerged concrete vaults jutted from the ice like the bones of a forgotten machine. His photographs were confiscated upon return. In 1992, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, a retired GRU officer named General Ivan Stepanovich Volkov broke decades of silence. In a filmed interview, he confirmed that the Soviet Union had indeed discovered a buried train near Lake Baikal in 1952. "We thought it was carrying weapons," he said, "but it carried silence." Volkov described metal drums welded shut, their exteriors covered in frost, though the air was warm. "One leaked," he added, "and the snow turned black." Within weeks of the interview, Volkov was found dead in his dacha outside Novosibirsk. Official cause: heart failure. The footage was confiscated by Russian authorities, but a single transcript page survived in the archives of Der Spiegel. Modern researchers who have studied the available documents agree on one thing. Operation Kestrel Line was not a simple transfer of materials. It was an evacuation, an attempt to move something dangerous out of reach of both the Allies and the Soviets. The fact that both German and Japanese symbols were found together suggests collaboration at a level historians still cannot fully account for. The coded term Morgenrot, morning red, may have signified not dawn, but warning. Satellite imagery from 2006 still shows faint rectangular depressions near the Yenisei coordinates, once attributed to the lost train. Periodically, the Russian Ministry of Natural Resources designates the surrounding tundra as an environmental exclusion zone. No reason is ever given. Locals call it Polya Mrtvych Ptic, the field of dead birds, because nothing flies there. The magnetometers of passing aircraft malfunction, compasses drift. Yet every decade, scientific expeditions request access to study permafrost cores, and each time, permission is denied. The last expedition granted clearance in 1989 reported elevated levels of arsenic, mercury, and an unidentifiable organic compound preserved in the ice. The report's final line reads simply, "Containment remains intact. Somewhere beneath that frozen desert lies a buried train, its cargo locked in silence since the final days of the Second World War. Whether it carried weapons, pathogens, or experiments meant to bridge two collapsing empires, no one can say. The ice has kept its secret well. Yet, as the Arctic warms and the permafrost retreats, the grid lines captured in those 1952 reconnaissance photos are slowly resurfacing. The past, it seems, is thawing, and with it, the memory of what was buried when the Kestrel line vanished beneath the snow. Chapter 5. The Vatican Black Files, Operation Concordat. In 1946, amid the ruin of post-war Europe, while tribunals in Nuremberg catalogued the crimes of the Reich, a quieter and more deliberate process was underway in Rome. Beneath the marble calm of Vatican City, a secret arrangement unfolded between agents of the newly formed OSS and certain members of the Roman Curia. The codename was Operation Concordat. Its stated purpose, according to the few declassified US documents, was the exfiltration of key humanitarian assets from occupied zones. But the actual files, locked for decades within the Vatican Apostolic Archive, tell a darker story: the deliberate transfer of Nazi and fascist officials, intelligence records, and experimental research through the Church's diplomatic channels to safe havens in South America. The trail begins with one name: Cardinal Giovanni Battista Montini, the future Pope Paul VI. The first OSS memorandum mentioning Concordat is dated March 12, 1946. It details a meeting between OSS operative Lieutenant William Donovan, WWII, and Monsignor Montini at the Palazzo della Congregazione per gli affari ecclesiastici straordinari. According to Donovan's field notes, Montini agreed to facilitate movement of classified European personnel under ecclesiastical protection, contingent upon anti-communist alignment. Attached to the memo is a handwritten addendum by an unidentified intelligence officer. Project Arca Veritas will proceed under Concordat umbrella. The Arca Veritas cache, historians later discovered, referred not to people but to documents, hundreds of files seized from collapsing Axis ministries, including research on psychological warfare, atomic radiation studies, and experimental interrogation methods developed by the SS Ahnenerbe. By summer 1946, the Vatican was the epicenter of a clandestine migration. Disguised as priests, scholars, and charity workers, dozens of former SS officers were moved through the monastery network that stretched from Italy to Spain, then across the Atlantic to Argentina and Chile. Among them were engineers from Peenemünde, members of the Reich Security Main Office, and medical personnel from Dachau's experimental division. Their new identities were prepared by a small clerical bureau known internally as Il Servizio di Assistenza Pontificia. Officially humanitarian, it maintained a parallel registry of passports bearing the Holy See's seal. The Red Cross processed these documents without question. In the margins of one such passport discovered in Buenos Aires in 1978, an archivist found faint initials: OC, Operation Concordat, the OSS. Desperate to secure scientific knowledge before the Soviets turned a blind eye. Declassified communications between the OSS Bern station and the Vatican Secretariat refer to special materials of atomic and psychological relevance being shipped under diplomatic seal aboard the Italian merchant vessel Santa Giulia. The manifest listed only religious archives and artifacts. When the ship docked in Buenos Aires in February 1947, the crates vanished into the warehouses of the German-Argentine Society. Witnesses claimed they were later moved to a Benedictine abbey near San Carlos de Bariloche, a region that would, over the following decade, become synonymous with the phrase rat line. In 1950, an Argentine intelligence memo labeled Protocolo 7B documented a network of European émigrés operating under church patronage. Among them were individuals linked to the wartime SS scientific division. Funding, the memo claimed, arrived from Vatican accounts routed through Swiss banks in Lugano and Geneva. A marginal note in Spanish reads, Arca veritas bajo concordato, continuidad asegurada. Continuity assured. When Argentine authorities requested clarification through diplomatic channels, the Vatican denied all knowledge. Yet a telegram dated August 3, 1951, from the US Embassy in Rome to the State Department states, Concordat pipeline remains functional. Possible transfer of documents concerning Reich research in psychological operations. In the mid-1950s, Pope Pius XII's health declined, and Montini, by then the Vatican's most influential administrator, tightened control over the Curia. During this period, several crates of archival material were relocated from the Secretariat's basement to a sealed vault beneath the Apostolic Library. The vault was known among clerics as La Crypta Nera, the Black Crypt. Its existence was denied until 1995, when a retired Swiss Guard officer, Captain Marcus Fleury, gave a private deposition to an Italian journalist. Fleury described black-sealed chests marked with the cross and the Reich's eagle, stored behind a false wall accessible only to senior clergy. He added, They told us the chests contained records of heresy, but heresy of what century I could not tell. Further corroboration surfaced in 1967 through a declassified CIA memorandum titled Vatican Liaison Summary, Operation Concordat. The report confirms US awareness of the Church's covert role in transferring both personnel and research material out of Europe. One passage stands out. Subject Montini believes safeguarding Axis knowledge prevents its misuse by Soviet science. Priority assigned to Arca Veritas cache, physical location unknown, possibly held under pontifical authority. That same year, Montini ascended to the papacy as Paul VI. The Vatican immediately restricted access to all war-era files under the pretext of moral sensitivity. The final reference to Concordat within US intelligence appears in 1974. An encrypted dispatch from Langley to the American Embassy in Buenos Aires reads, Do not pursue investigation into ecclesiastical involvement in exfiltration network. Vatican cooperation essential to current diplomatic objectives. 2 years later, Argentina's military junta rose to power. Within months, former SS men known to have traveled through the rat lines vanished once more, this time under state protection. Witnesses in Bariloche described unmarked trucks moving through the mountains at night, escorted by military police. Among the cargo, they claimed, were sealed chests bearing Latin inscriptions. The truth began to resurface only in 1998, when a partial inventory of Vatican diplomatic archives was accidentally leaked during digitization. Among thousands of entries was a file labeled Concordat 4652, non tradere, do not surrender. The index referenced telegrams between Vatican representatives in Rome, Madrid, and Buenos Aires, and one chilling addendum. Materials designated for preservation under Arca Veritas. Content: experimental records on psychological dissociation, sensory deprivation, and radiation field exposure, classified as non-theological. Within days, the Vatican issued an official statement denying the document's authenticity. Yet, the original index bore unmistakable registry marks consistent with the 1940s Secretariat. In 2005, researchers obtained a microfilm copy of a single page from the Concordat dossier. It contained a typed note, undated, but likely from 1947. Ensure the cross hides the Reich. The knowledge must endure beyond judgment. The author's identity remains unknown, though the signature appears to begin with GM. Some historians speculate Giovanni Montini himself. The phrase cross hides the Reich has since become shorthand among scholars investigating church complicity in post-war intelligence transfers. Today, the Vatican Black Files remain sealed under pontifical secrecy. Requests for access under scholarly review have been repeatedly denied. Argentine archival projects searching for links between wartime émigrés and Vatican correspondence report missing files, erased serial numbers, and unexplained gaps in diplomatic logs. The Arca Veritas cache, if it exists, has never been located. Some believe it was destroyed during the Argentine dictatorship's dirty war. Others suggest it was moved once again, perhaps to hidden archives within the Lateran complex, where the Church stores materials too politically sensitive for mortal custody. Whatever its current resting place, Operation Concordat reveals the uneasy marriage between faith, politics, and secrecy that defined the early Cold War. Behind the incense and marble corridors of the Holy See, beneath frescoes of angels and saints, a silent bureaucracy preserved the knowledge of a fallen empire. Its purpose, as Montini reportedly told Donovan in that first meeting, was to safeguard the truth until the world is worthy of it. Whether that truth was divine revelation or the devil's own ledger remains unknown, but somewhere behind Vatican walls, the files labelled Concordat still sleep, locked beneath the weight of moral immunity and the silence of history, a silence paid for with the redemption of men who should never have been saved. Long after the files are sealed and the witnesses gone, history keeps its own confessional, a room with no priest, no penance, only echoes. In that silence, truth becomes a rumour, shifting like light through stained glass, too fractured to be whole, too haunting to forget. Somewhere the last page still waits to be read, its corners burnt, its margins erased. But if you listen closely, past the hum of the world's official memory, you can almost hear it breathing. The secret that refused to die, the ghost that learned to wear the mask of faith. Some doors were never meant to be opened, some names never meant to be spoken. Yet the moment we ask what lies beneath, the lock begins to turn, and the darkness inside history smiles, knowing it has already been found.